Conscript is not a horror game about monsters. It has no zombies, ghosts, or anything supernatural to it. All that threatens you is rooted in the grim, pitiless reality of the First World War. The trenches, the rats, the chemical weapons, the artillery, and other young men exactly like yourself, with loved ones who want them to come home safely, but they're wearing the wrong uniform. And that makes them less than human. It has to if you want to make it out alive. It has to if you want to steel yourself against the idea of, well, 18-year-old boys puffing out their chests to posture at being grown men fighting for their country because they were sold the lie that to die for your country has meaning. Boys who wanted adventure, scared out of their minds because they just watched their friends' bodies scatter in 3 directions, and the shells keep falling. Boys who cry for their mothers to hug them and make everything okay again, but their feet are rotting out from under them, and the shells keep falling. The rats are constant and hungry. The men choke on gases that melt their lungs, and the bodies pile up, left to rot in a corner of the trench you don't go to anymore. And the shells keep falling. Boys who are executed for cowardice, because the Great War has no place for boys who break. As you might have gathered, Conscript is a horror survival game set during the Battle of Verdun in World War I, where you play as a French conscript called André, and while the setting is very fertile ground for supernatural horrors, I'm glad this game stuck to the already more than horrific realities of that conflict. The game has several difficulties: training, recruit, soldier, and veteran, and it defaults to soldier, which was what I played on. It also has options for how forgiving you want the save system to be, whether you want saving to be something that you use consumable items for, or not, and if you want checkpoints. I played with unlimited saves, but no checkpoints. How you set things is entirely up to you, and if you're the kind of person who likes the tension of trying to survive on as few saves as possible, you can absolutely do that. Personally, I hate having to repeat sections, so I really should have had checkpoints on as well, but you can't change those settings once the game has started, so keep that in mind. The environments and sound design come together beautifully, from sorrow or oppressive music during major battles to the stifling silence filled only by rain and distant gunfire. Despite the lack of any supernatural elements, some areas just feel malevolent, like you aren't supposed to be there, as if the very walls want to do you harm, as if you've descended into hell itself, but no, it's just war. I will say that there is a slight overuse of enemies rushing up on you in the dark when you're busy pushing something out of the way. Once or twice is fine, but it gets to be annoying when you know damn well you've gutted the surrounding area, so where the hell did that guy come from? And while you can play the game taking out dozens of enemy combatants by yourself, that doesn't mean André is some action hero. He is deeply rattled, and the further you get, the more his aim becomes jittery and unsteady, only stabilizing temporarily if you give him alcohol. His hands are also shown to be shaking during cutscenes, with wide, bloodshot eyes staring into the middle distance. How the game ends depends on your actions throughout, and there is a New Game Plus mode to carry over weapons and certain items. The Resident Evil inspiration comes through in the form of save rooms with a blue lantern and journal to save your progress, an item stash, and a mysterious merchant who buys and sells you things for cigarettes. I would very much recommend this game to anyone who is into survival horror, especially if you're looking for something different that doesn't rely on monsters or a big bad evil guy. You are just one among many, trying to make it through one of the bloodiest battles of the war and find your brother. While I won't give every detail of what you experience, I will be recounting the overall plot and spoil the endings, so if you don't want spoilers and would like to experience the game for yourself, this is where we part ways. For the rest of you, let's get into it, shall we? I'm trying to reach 100k subscribers by the end of the year, so if you enjoy this content and want to stay up to date, you know what to do. Our journey begins on July 11th, 1916, as André writes a letter to his mother. His younger brother Pierre was gassed recently but made a full recovery and is stationed at Fort Souville just uphill from him. The situation is grim, with phone lines severed, water poisoned and supplies low, due in no small part to the weeks of shelling the area has suffered. But Andre maintains hope that they will be relieved tomorrow. His riding is interrupted with the renewed pressure from the Germans, and we head out into the trenches. The game quickly familiarizes you with the other aspects of Resident Evil it carries in the form of locked doors and puzzles that need special key items. I don't have a problem with this in and of itself, it just feels a little jarring in this otherwise reality-induced horror setting that I had to open a church door with 4 square tiles arranged in the same position as their corresponding plates throughout a destroyed town, instead of a normal goddamn key. Navigating the trenches, it's immediately apparent how rough the fighting has been, with torn barbed wire, dead trees, the piles of spent artillery shells, ruined cannons, and bodies that have yet to be moved to their designated pit. Not to mention a gassed man writhing in agony in said pit because there was nothing to be done for him, so they just left him to die. You can see other soldiers on your way to the front, most running in the same direction as you, one being tended to by a medic, and another... To die from a bullet seems nothing. Parts of our being remain intact, but to be dismembered, torn to pieces, reduced to pulp, that is a fear that the flesh cannot support, and which is fundamentally the great suffering of the bombardment. Even with all our fellow soldiers around, the area is not secure, as on the way up to the front line we're attacked by Germans who managed to slip through our defenses. We even find Andre's brother Pierre with a bleeding head injury and what seems to be a dead German next to him. Moving Pierre to the cot, Andre cannot stay without risking execution for supposed cowardice. All men are ordered to the front, so we go on. The moment Andre steps outside, an injured French soldier is shot dead in front of him, and the resulting battle is a desperate scramble to stay alive as the two sides trade artillery fire and bodies continue to pile up around us. The attack ends with a gas strike, forcing Andre and anyone else lucky enough to have survived the battle to fall back to Fort Souville if they want to keep it that way. This is where I died for the first time, and where I immediately regretted not taking the option to have checkpoints because, as stated, I hate having to repeat sections. If the game wasn't telling a story of two brothers, an opportunity was here to put you in the shoes of a different soldier whenever you die, leaving the previous soldier's body where he fell, because you don't get another chance when your time is up. War doesn't care that you have unfinished business, that you're trying to save your brother. It is merciless, cruel, and uncaring chaos. This is also where I made a decision that would come back to bite me at the end of the game, because during my first run of this battle, I came across a code to a padlocked door. Not knowing what it led to, I ran to the door once I loaded back in and was given this prompt. And I did. More out of curiosity than anything else. And I want to warn you, even if you participate in every major battle after this point, even if Andre becomes instrumental in taking back forts and other areas, calling in aid and what have you, it will not matter if at any point you ran away from battle. Which is not to say that I think the game shouldn't have done it that way. I think it fits with the utterly criminal waste of human life that war fundamentally is. I'm just saying to keep it in mind if you decide to play the game. In the aftermath, Pierre has gone missing and Andre is ambushed by a German soldier, which admittedly scared the shite out of me when it happened because I wasn't expecting the first-person view. Rendered unconscious, we see a flashback of life before Andre and his brother were conscripted, living a relatively peaceful rural life with their mother. Pierre plays piano and draws, and if we read his journal, we learn that he's younger than Andre and plans to lie about his age so that he can join the war. Because he too was sold the lie that being a soldier was an adventure. We return to the trenches to find Andre was dragged to the corpse room, presumed dead by whoever is left, and there are definitely more bodies here now. Venturing out, it's clear the trenches are now riddled with German soldiers, adding danger and obstacles to Andre's search for help. This is the first real off-the-leash section of the game, where we're left to explore the trenches, clearing them of Germans, reinforcing areas by repairing the broken lines of barbed wire, and throwing grenades into rat holes, because if you don't, you're going to be chased down by an army of ravenous little infectious demons. Rats came up from the canal, fed on the plentiful corpses, and multiplied exceedingly. While I stayed there with the Welsh, a new officer joined the company and, in a token of welcome, was given a dugout containing a spring bed. When he turned in that night, he heard a scuffling, shone his torch on the bed, and found 2 rats on his blanket tussling for the possession of a severed hand. If you don't know what you're doing already, this part can be slow going, picking through different rooms, figuring out what you need in order to get through a certain obstacle, and frequently checking your map to see which doors have been marked off. If you do know what you're doing, there's an achievement for beating the game in under 3 hours. Have fun with that. There's a brief moment where you come across messenger pigeons still in their cages, and the game lets you hope that Andre will be able to call for aid, but once you return with the key, the pigeons have passed away. It's unclear if they were killed by someone or if something else did it. Either way, justice for our feathery companions, they deserved better from us. Throughout the game, you'll be able to pick up artillery shells that didn't detonate and reuse them to unblock certain passageways. The first time I saw one, I assumed it would explode if I picked it up. When it didn't, I remained cautious but continued to pick up shells when I saw them, expecting the game to eventually punish me, which it never did, and I don't know if I feel disappointed about that or not. Your only constant going forward is the mysterious merchant, who refers to you as poilu, which to my understanding means hairy one, and is apparently just something they called the French infantrymen back then. After solving a bunch of combination locks, acquiring keys, a gas mask, and finally a lockpick, Andre can eventually find what remains of his fellow soldiers hiding in a locked room beneath the fort. The lieutenant announces they're gearing up to retake the fort, leading to a second major battle where we help push the Germans out of the frontline trenches. After this battle, Andre is informed by the lieutenant that once Pierre's injuries were cleared, he was sent up to Fort Vaux. The problem is, they received word that Fort Vaux is in urgent need of backup, with its remaining men trapped in the basement. We only know this because Pierre managed to get the message out. We don't have the numbers to help them, so Andre is tasked with running a message for aid down to Fort Saint-Michel, and with reports of German platoons in the area, it will be a dangerous journey to make, but without phone lines or pigeons, a human runner is the only option left. Heading to the road, Andre slips on the stairs and knocks himself out with a smack on the nose. As you do, he has another flashback of life back home, helping his mother tidy the garden before waking up to our trusty merchant telling him that he took a tumble. Thankfully, the merchant brought him to a safe spot to recover. How long has Andre been out? Who knows, the shell shock probably masks the concussion anyway. The road section has its own nooks and crannies to search and its own obstacles to overcome. As one point of interest, you can talk to a German prisoner who asks you to find a picture of a woman he dropped further down the road. If you find it for him, he thanks you and gives you 30 cigarettes, a decent chunk of money. And it's an understated moment of kindness you can show to what is otherwise a sworn enemy. The real problem arises when you reach Fort Saint-Michel, to find that it too has suffered attack by the Germans, and the bulk of its remaining forces are trapped behind a fire that no one can put out because all the fire extinguishers have already been used up. It's been one supply failure after another, and conditions are only getting worse. Thankfully, through finding a horseshoe key, a Grim Reaper key, and a rooster key, scattered throughout the subsections of the road, not to mention a conveniently placed map through a small orchard minefield, we can find a crashed fighter plane with a usable fire extinguisher. Hurrying back to Saint-Michel, Andre puts out the fire, freeing the men trapped inside. So that went over well. We rest, have another flashback to winter setting in around the homestead and putting flowers on the grave of Andre's father, and return to the war. Returning to the front, the lieutenant orders us to hit the enemy position with a shot from the howitzer and round up any remaining men hiding in the blockhouses, making a point to say that any who refuse to join the fight need to be put down. During our search of the blockhouses, we can enter an old safe room to find it partially destroyed and darkened, the peaceful blue light of the lantern snuffed out and our merchant friend absent. Progressing any deeper into the room triggers an attack by one of the heavily armored night enemies, and surviving this ambush gives us 5 gun parts. You usually only find one at a time, and they're used to upgrade your weapon, so it's a hefty reward for this encounter. The attacker also drops a picture. Kindness, however well-meaning, does not erase the lines drawn by war. Once the howitzer is fired and all willing soldiers have been rounded up, we are once more thrust into the chaos of battle, this time with the intention of fighting our way to the Germans' position. Second by second, the hail of bullets and the thunder of shells grew stronger. Those who survived lay flat on the ground amid the screaming wounded and the humbled corpses. Isolated heroes made fantastic leaps, but all to no purpose. In an instant it had become clear that all the courage in the world could not withstand this fire. Upon tearing our way through the trenches, facing down a flamethrower-wielding soldier and trudging across the scarred battlefield, Andre finds a scrap of his brother's scarf, and we experience another memory of life back home. Outside Fort Vaux, we pass through the mass graves for all those fallen soldiers who could be gathered, who could no longer be given the scant dignity of a coffin because there were none left. Row after row of bodies discarded like chaff, sent to die by the ego and bloodlust of men who would never have to pay the same price for going to war. Is this the adventure they were promised? Did they feel like heroes in their final moments, or were they afraid, wishing their mothers would hug them and make the world feel right again? War is not glorious. It is a degradation of humanity. Pressing on, Andre must contend with navigating his way through a semi-destroyed town and its menagerie of locked doors, keys, obstacles, and dangers in order to acquire the key to Fort Vaux. Why the key to a military fort is hidden beneath a church that requires multiple different keys, water valves, and a tile puzzle to reach is a question for never. The soldier carrying it just happened to die down there, stop asking questions. Regardless, the moment we try to leave the church basement, Andre's mask chooses that exact moment to fail and he passes out. We're treated to another memory of life before the war, the day Andre and his brother were taken to basic training. But thankfully, he awakens to find that he was rescued by a medic character we've encountered a few times along the way. Each time the medic was encountered, we had the opportunity to hand over medical supplies that he needed to help with another soldier he was working on, so it kinda comes full circle that he's there when we need him. And I'm sure some insufferable dweeb out there will piss his britches over a Black World War I soldier, but French colonial troops were a thing. The French had colonies all over West Africa, and there were about 135,000 Senegalese tirailleurs fighting in Europe during World War I. How does that saying go? Facts don't care about your feelings? Anyways, the medic informs us that most of the men who charged with us are gone, and only a few made it to Fort Vaux. He knows he can't convince Andre out of trying to find Pierre, so he gives him supplies and opts to stay in town to help the wounded. There's no indication of who did it. No name, no face, no direction. It's sudden, jarring, and perfectly in line with the tone of the game thus far. Is what I would say if he didn't show up towards the end of the game having survived because of his helmet, but I'm not going to lie and say that I wasn't relieved to see him again, because stories of seemingly improbable survival are also part of war. Escaping the town, we finally make our way into Fort Vaux, a stronghold full of German soldiers and gas pockets that block our way just as surely as the locked doors do. It is expansive and unwelcoming and partially aflame from the fighting, which gives the lower levels an increasingly hellish atmosphere the further you descend, until it feels as if Andre is walking above a lake of fire. But picking our way through the deadly hallways and burning passages, we will eventually discover a live pigeon which Andre can release to call for help, and finally find our way into the lowest levels of Fort Vaux, where wounded soldiers lay curled and whimpering in the dark. With everything he has left, Andre secures Fort Vaux and defends it from the bush long enough for help to arrive. A final push sees the Germans ousted from the surrounding trenches, fighting through rain and gas, reducing men to pulp with a grenade launcher thrown to us by the lieutenant, breaking ourselves and the men around us one shot at a time. And even then, it isn't over. The Germans begin hitting the fort with their heaviest artillery, threatening to bury anyone who still remains in its walls, and so we lift Pierre and his mangled leg into our arms and march from the collapsing fort. All the while, he worries about their mother, apologizing over and over again, fretting about the watch and his legs, until eventually we emerge from the fort and get him to a medical tent, whereupon Andre collapses from exhaustion. How it all ends from here is down to your actions throughout the game. If you fought in every battle, if you recovered Father's lucky watch, if you called for help, 3 of the 4 endings leads to different flavors of tragedy, different levels of cruel, pitiless waste. Trapped beneath the rubble of Fort Vaux, executed for cowardice, Andre living the rest of his life in shell-shocked recollection, unable to move on from what he saw. The 4th, however, feels especially heavy. If you do everything correctly, then both brothers survive, rattled by their experiences, strained in their connection to each other, but they live. They both go on to raise families, but Pierre's doesn't last. His child passes young and he succumbs to lung damage at the dinner table. Andre, in contrast, lives his life and gets to see his son grow up into a fine young man. The game ends on the date May 5th, 1940, and even if it takes years to find him again, Andre never truly escapes the beast that is war, because if it cannot take him, it will just take his son instead. I will freely admit that I enjoy violent games. There's something satisfying to the feedback of a particularly punchy weapon like the Deadeye rifle in Helldivers 2. There's a visceral pleasure to be taken from the glory kills in Doom Eternal. But I have no taste for any of it outside the safe confines of fiction. Conscript is a horror game that relies purely on the vicious indifference of war, from the constant shelling driving men out of their mind to the rats feasting on fresh bodies, the panic of chemical weapons, and the execution of your fellow soldiers because they were too scared to fight. It doesn't need anything fanciful to drive home the bleak misery of it all. I can enjoy a heroic war story about valiant efforts in the face of impossible odds, and still feel that none of it should have ever happened to begin with, that the horrors inherent to war far outweigh whatever good can be dug out of the filth it creates. Which isn't to say that I don't think there can be good motivations or good outcomes in a war, simply that by its very nature, war dismantles those good intentions. It asks you to valorize the act of dying violently in the hundreds and thousands and more, to ascribe meaning to the corpses of 300,000 sons, brothers, fathers, uncles, and say, this was worth it. Because if it wasn't worth it, if we didn't have some higher goal, some greater purpose to achieve, if laying down your life for your country really just amounted to another statistic, another body stripped down and thrown into a hole with the rest of the numbers, what else could we have done? As Storytellers points out in his video about anti-war media, films in particular, the cost of war is not paid by the men who declare it. They aren't beholden to its spiteful cruelties. And so, because those men wanted to be symbolic by ending World War I on the 11th hour of the 11th day in the 11th month, there was a delay of 6 hours before the first armistice went into effect, leading to thousands more deaths that were completely and utterly avoidable. Where's the meaning in that? I found them lying just a few yards away. They'd had their legs blown off, and all I could see when I got to them was their thigh bones. I will always remember the white thigh bones. The rest of their legs were gone. Private Jackie Oliver was one of them, and he was unconscious. I shouted back to the fellows behind me, "Tell Reedy Oliver his brother's been wounded." So Reedy came and stood looking at his brother, lying there with no legs, and a few minutes later he watched him die. But the other fellow, Private Bob Young, was conscious right to the last. I lay alongside him and said, "Can I do anything for you, Bob?" He said, "Straighten my legs, Jack." But he had no legs. I touched the bones, and that satisfied him. Hey everyone. I know this was a bit more serious than usual, but I'm hoping the next few videos will be lighter. I'm also hoping that all of you are taking care of yourselves in the meantime. If you want to stay up to date on all my videos, then don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you all next time.